God's men are shaped by treading tough terrain. Great men are made by treading tough terrain. Are you treading pretty tough terrain?
Yeah.
Are the steps that you're taking, are the things and the moves that you're making, are the things that you're doing getting tougher and tougher and rougher, and things you just wonder, how in the world can the world get any worse? Well, I want to tell you, God takes and God creates great men and shapes them by them treading on tough terrain. So if you're moving on tough terrain, you hang on. General Patton, when he was sent into the Battle of the Bulge, he said quite simply, after they told him what he was supposed to do, he said, "It sounds to me like you need a great open field runner." And he took more soldiers, more armies, more land, and more countries than had ever been taken before by any general in any battle. You see, what happens is God's men are shaped by tough terrain. General MacArthur, we've all seen the picture. He goes walking out into the Pacific Ocean, standing there in the water, looking back at the Philippines, and he says, "I shall return." And he returned. You see, God makes great men through treading tough terrain. We've all heard of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And he was made famous because of that charge up San Juan Hill. It made him a soldier. It made him respected by people. But more than that, it made him a president. God makes great men by treading tough terrain. Have you ever heard the story of Raising Cane? Raising Cane's a general in our army. And everybody told President Trump to destroy the Muslims, the radicals, the haters. It would take 5 years. He went over there and said, "I want to see what's going on." He asked this man, "What's your name?" He said, "My name's Dan Kane." And Trump said, "Are you Raising Cane?" And he said, "Yes." And then he told President Trump, he said, "It will not take you 5 years. 5 years is with our troops flying from here all the way to where they have to bomb, and then spending 15 minutes flying over the target, and then 5 hours flying back." He says, "If you will tell all of our allies that we are going to use their bases all the way, you can have a 5-minute flight to the fight, and then you can have a 5-hour flight over the fight." And they wiped out the enemy in 2 months. In 2 months. You see, God takes, and God's men are shaped by walking on tough terrain. I had an Israel tour with a military tank commander who commanded a battalion for about 4 of the wars in Israel's past. And this man always spent time pointing out the terrain, letting us know what was happening, telling us what had taken place, because as a tank commander, he was very aware of what was required to get his tanks through and all of that, and to do all of that. And I want to tell you, David's war against Saul was won because he was a shepherd. David as a soldier performed the way he performed because as a little boy, as a shepherd, he walked this land with the sheep and he knew the land intimately. God uses great men by walking on tough terrain. If you're walking tough terrain, don't worry about it because God is working with you. David as a shepherd walked this land with his sheep. And if he could find a place where a sheep could sleep, he could find a place where his soldiers could sleep. And David was very aware of what was taking place, and he made it happen. As it took place, it did. David knew the mountains, he knew the hills. David knew the stone enclosures. David knew the rock mountains. David knew all of the heavily wooded areas with clearings in the middle. He knew all of the heavily wooded area that had streams running through it. He knew everything, and Saul's soldiers knew nothing. You see, God takes men that he's going to make great, and he runs them through tough terrain until they learn the terrain, and then God gives them the victory. That's what happened in the text. David was familiar with everything because he had seen it as a shepherd, and Saul's men were unaware of what was going on around him. I'm going to try to take some time to take a look at this terrain that David knew. In the 14th verse, it said, "And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds." What's a stronghold? Well, it's either a rocky circle, it's a rocky spire, or it's perhaps a heavily wooded forest. It's an area with a lot of trees, a lot of big trees, heavy trees, that nobody can see through, that armies can't march through, that arrows can't fly through. And David knew where they were. David was in the strongholds, while Saul had no idea where he was going. While Saul was following a bunch of people who didn't know where they were going. So if you don't know where you're going in the tough terrain, hold the Lord's hand. Say, "Lord, I want to hold your hand, and I want you to lead me through this land because I want to know where you're going." Because God makes great men by walking them through tough terrain. And for women, that goes double. Just in case anybody thinks I'm sexist. "And he remained in the mountain in the wilderness of Ziph." This was the Judean desert. The Judean wilderness. It was heavy with trees at that time. It was heavy with brush. It was hard to see. It was very overcome. And it was called, in the Hebrew, a place that is overflowing, a place that is purifying, because as you go through it, if you don't know where you're going, you're going to get stripped as you go through. You're going to get tripped as you go through. But if you know where you're going, it will take and it will bless you. It will make you good. Life was important there. I'll never forget the wilderness of Ziph. And the men were there. And Saul sought him every hour, every day, and the Lord delivered him not into his hand. You see, this is one thing that every great leader of the Lord knows. He knows that I'm not in charge. God is in charge. Have you figured it out yet? With your life, with your difficulties, with your problems, you're not in charge. The Lord is in charge. This is something that Moses had to figure out when he stood there at the Red Sea. As he stood there at the Red Sea, and the water was in front of him, he had to recognize the Lord was in charge. This was something that Gideon had to face as he saw this entire valley filled with the Philistine enemies, and David's army was reduced from 2,000 to 300 men. It was reduced, and it was reduced, and it was reduced, and Gideon had to figure that God was the one who was in charge. This is the one that had to take place when Deborah called Barak and said, "We're going to stand against all the iron chariots of all the enemy." And she had to recognize that God chose the battleground because he chose it in a muddy place where the iron chariots bogged down in the mud and could not go and could not move. This is the place where Joshua stood before Jericho, and he said, "I must ask you, are you with me or are you with the enemy? And he said, I'm with the Lord's army. I am the leader of the Lord's army. And Joshua said, I will follow you. You see, God puts us in tough places, tough terrain, so that we can learn that God is going to take care of us, that God is going to make it happen, that God is going to be with us. In tough times, life is reduced to its essence. Have you started to recognize yet that all those things you used to think were really important aren't quite so important as you thought?
Yeah.
Has the vision started to come through? I know it has for me. I know it has for Diane. I know it has for our family. You start to recognize that things are not nearly as important as you originally thought they were. Because God has another set of values that He is imparting to you, another set of insights that He is giving and developing through you. And the tough terrain is that which will make you able to do it. Verse 15. And David was in the wilderness of Ziph, in the woods, and Jonathan came to him. The son of Saul arose and went to David and strengthened his hand in God. Did you get that? Mm-hmm. He strengthened his hand in God. Sometimes it's a Christian friend who will speak through. Sometimes it's another believer. Sometimes it's a messianic. Sometimes it's something that you read that is given to you by Macaulay. Sometimes it's one of those things that she has read, that she has studied over, that she has been inspired by, and she gives to us. And as you read it, you say, yesterday that didn't mean a lot to me, but today it really speaks. Today it tells me what I need to know. Today it's speaking to my heart and letting me know what has happened. Jonathan came to David and he said, fear not. Fear not. The hand of Saul, my father, will never find thee. Can you imagine what this meant to David as he's running from one wilderness fortress to another, from one stone hedge to another, from one stone fortress and stronghold to another, running back and forth throughout the land, and Jonathan comes to him and says, David, don't worry, my father will not provide you, because the Lord has made it clear that you are to be the king of Israel. And then Jonathan adds something that just warms your heart. He says, and I shall stand beside you. I'll give up the throne. I'll give up all pretense for the throne. I'll give up all pretense for richness. I'll give up all pretense for everything. What I will do is I will stand beside you, because I know the Lord has chosen you. If you stand with the Lord in the tough times, the terrain won't matter. Your shoes may wear out. They may tear. Your pants may get on fire and catch you. But God will be with you. That's an allusion to the fact that Frank Eddy, who's usually sitting right back there, was making a fire on Memorial Day, and he got lighter fluid all over the bottom of his pants. He caught on fire, and whoosh! Suddenly, he's being burned and burned and burned, and he's going to the hospital twice a week to have all the wounds cleaned out. Yep, things can happen that quickly. But it's his good Christian Messianic friends who are picking him up, taking him to the hospital, and bringing him back when he can. And that's what Jonathan says. You shall be the king, and I shall stand with you. I shall be right beside you, and I shall never stop. That was important to David because it gave him the strength to keep going on. And the two of them made a covenant with the Lord. When you make a covenant with someone, the Bible in Proverbs says a 3-braided rope is not easily broken. When you make a covenant, you are one of the braids, they are one of the braids, and the Lord is the eternal component of that covenant. And so you and he, you and she are bound together by the Lord in eternity, who is in charge of that. A three-knotted cord is not quickly broken. It cannot be broken. That's what we need as we walk through the tough terrain of life. And David's men then went to the wilderness of Maon, in a place south of Jeshurun. And David came down to a rocky place and was there in the wilderness of Maon. Now this is interesting because it tells you that God can provide for you in very difficult times. This land, Jeshurun, is a desert place. It's a barren place. And it's the south side of Maon. So what you have is David being provided with heavily wooded area, and he's right off of a desert. He's right off of a desert place. And God is taking care of him in difficult times. And he's making it happen in difficult times. And Saul came to one side of the mountain, and David came to the other side of the mountain, and they named the mountain the Hill of Decision, the cliff of the great escape. Because you see, when you are placed in leadership, when God calls you to lead, calls you to do, it says, and David ran away, for he was in great fear. When you are called to serve the Lord, I want to point out that fear is always very near. A great man is not a man who's not afraid. A great man is a man who is afraid and learns to control that fear in order to serve God.
Amen.
A great man is a man who has all these emotions, but he uses these emotions to serve the Lord, and even the fear that drives him does not destroy him, does not desecrate him. To be great in serving the Lord, you have to learn to control the emotions, be they good or be they bad. I'll never forget when I was in Tampa. I was very close to MacDill Air Force Base. I was the nearest Lutheran church to MacDill Air Force Base, which became CENTCOM, the command for the Gulf War. And it's been a place of command ever since. And so I had a lot of military people who came to my church when I was at MacDill Air Force, or by MacDill Air Force Base. And there was this one woman who came to the church, and she was short. She was about that tall. She was stiff as a professional soldier should be. She always dressed very professionally, like a soldier. She rode and drove a Mercedes-Benz, and she had traveled all over the world in the military. She had been in Germany, she had been in the Gulf, she had been in South America, she had been all over. And I preached one sermon one Sunday when she was there, and the name of that sermon was The Loneliness of Leadership. And once a year, she'd walk up to me, and she'd say, Pastor, isn't it about time for the loneliness of leadership? Because great people, she as a woman who was a major in the military way back in the 1970s, she understood the concept of loneliness that it takes to lead. And when God calls you to lead, the first thing you have to conquer is the loneliness within yourself. Is the loneliness and the fear that challenges yourself. And so she had to stand that way. I'll never forget, one of my favorite movies is The Last Samurai. And it's about an American captain who goes to Japan to train the feudal warriors over there when they are converting to a modern military. And he is captured by the enemy, and he winds up living in a house with a family. And there's a little boy who knows that there's going to be a big war between the samurais and the modern military. And the little boy is very distressed, and he's very depressed, and he says to the American captain, he says, I am just very, very, very depressed and afraid of what is coming. And instead of being big and brave and bulky, the American captain puts his arm around him and says, I want to tell you, I too am afraid. And the little boy looks at him and says, you've been in many fights, you've been in many wars, you have many, many times fought. And the captain looks down at him and said, and I was always afraid. That's something we as Christians need to learn. God does not take away fear. He uses that as the tough terrain to train you on how you handle yourself when you are working for God, when you are doing what He wants you to do, when you seem to be fighting that loneliness of leadership because nobody really understands what you're trying to pull together. Nobody really tries to understand what you're trying to make happen. And God uses the tough terrain to train you to handle the emotions and the negative ones that you have to handle in your life. If you can be calm and cool when everybody else is exploding all around you, it doesn't mean you don't know what's going on. It means you know that God is in charge. It means that your God is in charge of it. And so, in verse 21, developing this text, a messenger came to Saul. And he said, Saul, I want to tell you, the Philistines are coming. And so Saul has to take off chasing David. When he's got him about surrounded, when he's ready to get him, Saul has to take his army and he has to go fight the Philistines. God often works that your worst enemies become your best friends. This happened to Martin Luther. The Pope was putting together a massive army to destroy all the Lutherans. He was going to destroy, they weren't called Lutherans at that time, they were called evangelicals. And the Pope was putting together a massive, massive army to destroy all the Protestants, all the evangelicals, all the Bible believers, all the prayers, all those who are not part of the Roman Church. He had a massive, giant army prepared to go and destroy all the Protestants. And just then from Kosovo, a Muslim army came up and started moving over to attack Vienna. And the Pope had to take his army and send it to Vienna and fight the Muslims. So it was actually him having to fight the Muslims to save Vienna, which saved the Reformation, which actually was simply God saving the Bible believers, the Bible readers, the Bible prayers who would trust in God first. So this is not unusual. It's the same thing that happened. God uses tough terrain to train His people to trust Him, because you have to trust Him. And then comes chapter 24, verse 2. And David went up and dwelt in the strongholds of En-Gedi. And En-Gedi actually means place that is flowing, place that is moving. Because En-Gedi is a very rocky place with a lot of mountains. It has a lot of goats and a lot of rocky goats, and a lot of mountain goats running up and down the hills. It's just a very beautiful place if you don't have to climb it too hard. And if you think that your life is too tough, If you think that your life is too rough, I want you to recognize that life for all people is rough. How'd you like to handle it without Yeshua?
Amen.
How'd you like to be facing the future of where we're going, fearing what we're knowing, seeing what we don't know? How would you like to face all of that? And the people who don't know him have the same kind of problems and difficulties, and they often don't even understand what is coming, why it's coming, or how it's coming. What's important for you to understand is when you're climbing a difficult hill, the obstacles provide the handholds, the footholds, the braces that you can use to climb the mountain. God takes his people, and he makes his people through the tough terrain that they walk through. So if you're walking through some pretty rough terrain, if things are pretty difficult for you, for those that you love, recognize God has you as one of his people. Will you rise for the Aaronic benediction?